because of my background in art. I'd majored in art in my undergraduate degree for 3 years before switching over to Middle Eastern Studies.
I wonder how many remote viewers that were trained like you had an artistic background.
Well, they actually were looking for people with a kind of an artistic background. So
wow.
The criteria for selecting intelligence officers to be in the program was that they were competent in their skill, that they were fairly high intelligence, that they had done everything they're supposed to do as an intelligence officer and competent and all that. Plus, one other thing, that they were involved in some kind of creative pursuit. And the ones that were kind of under consideration was music, studio art of some kind, maybe creative writing, such like that. Languages, although language is not as uncommon in intelligence, but more than one foreign language, it tends to use a different part of the brain. Any one of those things was an indicator. I happened to have done all four of them, so that was one of the reasons they thought they'd take a flyer on me. But any kind of thing that activates the right brain, where you're exercising the link between right and left and enabling the right brain, trying to bring it out of its normal slavery to the left brain, that was deemed as a good indicator that you might have some success as a remote viewer. So if somebody comes to take my course and they're very left brain, I try and beat that out of them to some degree.
That's funny.
Figuratively speaking.
How would you know if someone's left or right brain?
Electrical engineer is going to be left brain.
How about broadcasting?
Broadcasting is probably mixed.
Yeah.
And just knowing someone's background can give you a better idea. But oftentimes you don't know when they show up. But within a short time, you realize where they're coming from.
I want to get back to one part about time that you were talking about. When you talked about the future is more sketchy than going back into the past.
Yes.
I want to distill that. I want you to distill that for audiences, and then I want to answer the question about the specific applications that are concrete and doable that one may be motivated to learn remote viewing in order to access.
Okay. You notice that the thread that's holding this interview together is time?
Yes.
Okay, so future. We've talked about past, we've talked about present, we're going to talk about future. It's interesting to note in remote viewing experiments and such that remote viewing past events and past things in the past, and remote viewing things in the present, or as I've described, the very recent past, you tend to be fairly accurate at that and fairly successful. So I'd say roughly 70%, 70 to 80%, depending on your skill level. In certain stretches, you might even get higher than that, but that's roughly where we'll go.
That's still great.
Yeah. Considering you shouldn't be able to do it at all, it's actually quite amazing. But the future, when you start remote viewing the future, success rate drops off dramatically. It goes down 5, 10, maybe 15% if you're lucky. And I think the reason that is because the future doesn't exist yet. Now, that sounds kind of silly. Well, of course the future doesn't exist. But you have to realize there's a number of metaphysical systems which speculate that the future really does exist, and that rather than we flowing along with a wave of time that moves into the future, that we're actually just consciousness traveling along a fixed timeline, and that we have the illusion that time is moving when it's really us that is.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah. The remote viewing evidence, however, suggests that model's not right. It suggests that the idea of the future as being a bunch of potentials that aren't realized is probably the more accurate view of it.
How is it for those psychics who are accurate to the T, how are they able to access telling somebody about their future with precision data, not remote viewing, but clairvoyance? How can they transmit that when the person hasn't experienced it yet and it happens? See, that's a phenomenon that makes me wonder, well, can they both exist?
Well, a couple of things in response there. First off, you only hear the success stories. If you were actually to be able to collect all of the predictions that any psychic makes about future events.
Probably most of it's wrong.
Yes, but you don't hear the wrong stuff. First of all, that's not good publicity. Second of all, there's really not much point. It was wrong. What are you going to do with it? You know it's wrong. There's nothing you can really learn from that, right? So you hear the success stories, and the fact is that every once in a while it works. I had an experience that I gave an exact, precise, very detailed description of an event that didn't happen until 50 hours later, which astonished me to death. But the fact is, sometimes you're going to be right as a psychic or remote viewer predicting a future event, because some one of those potential futures is going to happen. You don't know which one it is. The thing that decides the time stream doesn't know what it is, because there are a number of variables that are basically oftentimes just tripped randomly. But there is one of those that's going to be realized. And if you happen to remote view the right possible future, then you're going to be right. Again, we're putting quotes around that word,
Yes.
right? You're going to be right. If you remote view the wrong probable future or possible future, you're going to be wrong. Again, quotes around the wrong. It's a little more complicated than that, because there are some events that are more sure to happen than others. That has to do with determinism and the role of human intention. But in general, it's kind of a crapshoot as far as whether you're going to be right or wrong about the future. And that's just because there are so many possible futures, and which one gets realized, which one gets actualized, has to do with an innumerable number of little determining events that could go one way or the other in between. I call those decision nodes. So, for example, the example I use, I think I might have said this in my book, I don't remember.
You did.
Where
almost like a neural net kind of thing, decision nodes.
It is kind of like that, but that, of course, is still deterministic. This is I think the eccentricity wheel in all of this is human intentionality. That it's really, there's two things. Random events, such as the decay of nuclear particles, and human intentionality are the two things that throw off the future from being deterministic. Deterministic meaning you could predict the future if you knew all the variables, if everything was just determined. Right?
So how are all these remote viewers packaging their works? I don't want to name names, but
yeah.
How is it that they're able, in good conscience, to package this ability to predict and see the future with using remote viewing as a tool to, and yet a very high probability of being able to access the future with remote viewing drops considerably?
Well, the key there is good conscience. There's a Mark Twain short story which I absolutely love. It's something like the remarkable story of the recent spate of crimes in Handleysburg, Mississippi, or something like that. In the story, there's this huge outbreak of crimes. It's all created by one guy who managed previously to get his conscience trapped in a corner of the room and kill it. So he no longer has a conscience, and he doesn't have any problem committing crimes. That's a little harsh. But if you can look at some of these claims out there, and you'll see that prediction after prediction after prediction has been made, and continues to fail. None of them come true. There are a couple claims of coming true predictions, but if you look at it, it's data fitting, really.
Do you think that the project Stargate would have been funded if the funders knew that you would have more access to the past, or the recent past and the entire past, and that you would have great difficulty accessing data in the future?
Well, the fact is, most of our targeting was actually they didn't really target us on the future very much. We were collecting intelligence real time. That's what they were looking for, and to some degree past. For example, they wanted to know what was going on in a Soviet weapons laboratory right now.
Okay.
They didn't so much want to know what was going to happen a week from now there, because they needed to find out what was going on now. And oftentimes we would do a terrorist group having a meeting in some place in Yemen or someplace, and they wanted to know what might have gone on at that meeting, and we'd get targeted on those kind of things. So occasionally we get future targeting, but it was mostly kind of standard intelligence stuff. The intelligence industry or intelligence community, they bring in the intelligence, and then the